Full transfer. This is change your password. Oh yes. Sometimes delicate express a lot of mustache here. So some mustache would. So thank you. You organize us this opportunity. Wonderful, wonderful. And when I give some talk, and particularly the Nalanda tradition, the differences is a Pali tradition, mainly is a believe or accept Buddha's word. And then the Sanskrit tradition, Nalanda tradition, always raise question, why? Even Buddha's own sort of words. We take the sort of
liberty, no?
questioning, why? So, like Nagarjuna and Buddha Balida and Chandrakirti, many of these masters make distinction. Buddha's own word, such Buddha's word, we can accept. Such Buddha's word, the Buddha taught according particular sort of audience. So according to their mentality, he taught that but basically we cannot accept. So Buddha himself, give permission or I don't know. He mentioned, oh my follower, monks, scholars, should not accept my teaching out of faith, but rather thorough investigation and experiment. So Buddha himself give us liberty to investigate. Although I respect all major world tradition. Over 1,000 years, you see, these different traditions really helped humanity in order to increase human loving kindness. Wonderful. But in the philosophical field, Buddhism is something quite unique. Buddha, you see, give us encouragement.
Lord.
You see, question. So in order to utilize human brain fully, the word why, that's very important. No. The word yes, not good. So I really appreciate, you see, your firstly your organization. Really last now few years. I think that because of create opportunity meeting with number of scientists.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah.
So now, when I met, you see, my longtime friend, you see, everybody, many of my friends looks old. So when I saw, you see, my friend now become old, so then I must reflect myself also become old. But okay, the other day I mentioned my Indian friend, my energy, like lake, you see, difficult, because all my energy goes to my brain. So I think next few years, I think another 10, 15, even 20 years, I will remain. I will be active, even on wheelchair, physically on a wheelchair, but my mouth, bala, 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 bala. Thank you.
Okay. Good morning, Your Holiness. Mind and Life is so happy to be back with you, and we're grateful and humbled to be here in your home again. And you are part of the Mind and Life family, and we are here. Mind and Life is here because of you. And
I think firstly,
yes,
your husband, Ninja.
Varela, no.
Varela, Ninja. Usually, Varela is express two head. One head, Buddhist head. Then he explained some Buddhist ideas. Then another head, science head. Then he's explaining about the science.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful. His picture, always in my room, I often look. Thank you.
Yeah. And we are happy and so happy that you're in great health. And your mind is working as sharply as ever. So, it has been over 30 years that you've been engaged in conversations with scientists and other thought leaders with Mind and Life. And we're so happy that you're continuing again. And this work, and today we're doing a little bit different format than we have before. We're calling these conversations. And the theme for today, this morning, and Friday morning is on compassion,
Governor, you want to do it? Governor, ka. Sending more. Oh, okay.
Okay. So today, this morning, Friday morning, we meet together. And
Right.
the theme, the overall theme, is compassion, interconnectedness, and transformation. And this theme is really central to Mind and Life's work right now. Pretty much all of our programs and the grants that we're giving are lifting up this theme of interconnectedness and societal transformation. So we're going to deepen that during our time together here. And the speaker this morning is David Sloan Wilson, and I will say more about David in a moment. And our speaker on Friday is Pumla Gobodo Madikizela. And Pumla is from South Africa. And she is a social scientist and clinical scientist. And her work is embedded in the African tradition of Ubuntu. She's a dear colleague of your dear friend, Archbishop Desmond Tutu.
Oh, oh, wonderful.
Yeah. They worked closely on the Truth and Reconciliation Project in Africa.
Now I'm getting older and older. So I remember Desmond Tutu. Oh, because we very, very close sort of trusted friend. And I always consider elder spiritual brother. Wonderful. So whenever we met, you see, we always teasing.
Teasing
each other.
He described me mischievous Dalai Lama. Then I respond mischievous bishop. In this very room, one occasion, you see, he mentioned he as a Christian believer, so he ready to go to heaven. Dalai Lama may go something different. So now, getting older and older, I'm waiting. Then actually, so I keep my memory. So the Bishop Tutu's word, true or not, I will examine.
So on Friday, we will hear a lot from
Right.
Pumla, and you will be in conversation with her. And on Friday morning, the moderator will be Aaron Stern. And Aaron is a Mind and Life board member. He is the founder and president of the Academy for the Love of Learning and a dear member of our Mind and Life family. So that'll be on Friday. After the conversation with David, we're going to have a larger conversation. And Richie Davidson, our founding board member, chief scientific advisor, longtime friend of yours, will moderate that part of it. Thank you, Richie. And then Jimpala is here with us. He is our Mind and Life board chair.
Yes.
But in this role, he's serving as your
Yes,
support.
many years.
Yeah. Yeah. So I will begin by introducing David with more formal introduction. And David is a very esteemed evolutionary biologist. He is a distinguished professor in New York at Binghamton University, president of an organization called the Evolution Institute. And he's a very famous contributor to the foundational knowledge of evolutionary science. And going beyond genetic evolution to looking at cultural evolution.
evolution theory tante biology naloya
Or evolution, right?
the call mix it the Quran and the gene member culture that to evolution
And his perspective on evolution is very hopeful. It gives us a hopeful perspective for the human species and the planet. So I think you're going to be a very rich discussion between the two of you. But before David begins, Your Holiness, would you like to begin and share some more words?
As I often use expressing, the very purpose of this kind of meeting, number one, expand our knowledge. It seems to me the modern science in world with physical, say, atom, or quark in these fields, you see, they are sort of, as a result of research, so very detailed, very precise explanation. Now, when the subject about mind, emotion, then the science field not adequate. So we need more work about inner world, about mind. So that's one of our purpose is expansion or sort of knowledge. Then another sort of purpose is why we are sort of talking. I feel today's world, materials, and also even scientific sort of research, scientific knowledge, highly developed, and with that, economy and many things highly developed. Yet, the real question of amount of human happiness and the world itself, now a lot of problems. Many of these problems is actually our own creation. So, now today's world, global warming, and to some extent, beyond our control. But many other problems, for example, the problem due to huge gap, rich and poor, national level, global level, and then war. So the knowledge about through science, you see, use for killing. Very sad. And then existing situation is we too much sort of emphasis, we and they. On that basis, even religious faith also causing problem. At this very moment, we enjoy peace, peaceful sort of atmosphere. But same time, same planet, same human being, even in the name of religion, killing each other. Syria, Afghanistan, and this Arab area. So these are our own creation. So it's our responsibility how to make some contribution to reduce this killing, violence, and this suffering. Since these problems, human creation, so logically, we human beings have the ability to
solve them,
reduce this problem. If not,
eliminate.
Eliminate. So that's our one main sort of purpose. Number of occasion, some scientists mentioned basic human nature. Since we are a social animal, that is true. You see, each individual's survival depends on the community. Since we are a social animal, therefore, compassion by nature, we human beings have that. So basic human nature is more compassionate. That's really a hopeful sign. Now the mistake is education system. Existing education system, very much oriented about material value, including science. External science, not inside science, so because inner science.
Inner science.
Now, since therefore, now time come, we must make effort to educate human being the importance of the warm-heartedness. This human marvelous brain must combined with warm-heartedness. If this wonderful brain combined with anger, fear, then become destructive. So this brain should combine with warm-heartedness. That not through teaching, religion, but now scientific sort of research. And now, as I mentioned earlier, some scientists say, you see, constant anger or hatred is very bad for our health. I think, according to my own little experience, I think the compassionate mind, more practice that, then the whole phenomena appears something very positive. That reduces fear or suspicion. So too much self-centered attitude. Then this side also, you see, you get some suspicion. Here also suspicion. Altruism, entire sentient being, particularly 7 billion human beings. We are same. One human community. We have to live side by side on this planet. Then you see, killing each other, make sort of declaration, we strong, we and they, is very short-sighted, narrow-minded, old thinking. Now today's world, entire 7 billion human beings are one human community, live on one planet. So now these things through scientific sort of basis explain. I think, you see, more people, I think more conviction, rather than religious sort of spiritual leaders say that. Religion, of course, still many people get some benefit, but 7 billion, I think over 1 billion non-believer, true. And among the believer also, you see too much concept of we and they and killing each other. Very sad, very, very sad. Like that. So that's our main sort of one purpose is to promote human value and ethics. Value, ethics, very much related. Okay.
Thank you, Your Holiness. Perfect beginning. So I'd love to ask David to begin and just share your bit of your work and your perspective.
I felt something. May I express?
Please.
You, lot of white hair. So sometimes people say more sort of worry and more white hair. So I'm now 84-year-old, but still
Dark.
quite
So
dark.
Okay. Well, it is such a pleasure, of course, to be talking with you. And I want to begin by listing 4 things that I admire about you and what you represent for me. First, your love of science and truth-telling. Truth-telling, telling the truth. You have written, anyone who defies the authority of empirical evidence is unworthy of engagement in a critical dialogue. In other words, don't make stuff up. Don't make stuff up.
우수님 보고 때 가서 고는 우수님 보고 원래 좀 시사지 왔던 리시님 보고데.
Yes.
Yeah, and how I wish that certain people in my nation of America would heed that advice. Second, your call for an ethics for the whole world, even to the point of going beyond religion, as you put it in the title of one of your books. So as you have just said, we are first and foremost citizens of the earth, regardless of our other identities. And yet we can't just be citizens of the earth. We also do and must have other identities that group us at smaller scales. And so the third thing I admire about you is your courageous stewardship of Tibetan culture and religion. These are cultures which stretch back long, long before Western science existed as a cultural institution. And I admire what you said just about the Buddha being a scientist, basically, an experimentalist, encouraging us to always ask why. And then finally, your humility, your insistence that you are first and foremost a human being, no higher than any other human being. And that's why I can feel comfortable talking with you like this on an equal footing. So these are the four things that I admire about you. Now, I am a scientist who studies evolution, a theory so simple that it can be described in 3 words. Variation, just about everything that you can measure in an organism varies. Selection, these differences often make a difference in terms of...
Selection.
No.
Often make a difference in terms of survival and reproduction. And replication, the fact that most organisms pass on their traits to their offspring. And when these 3 ingredients are put together, something magical happens. Organisms become a kind of a malleable clay that gets shaped by their environments. Those traits that increase survival and reproduction become more common, and so the organisms become well adapted to their environment. And so this simple theory can be used to explain all aspects of life, basically. So simple and yet so powerful. Now, when I was a student 50 years ago, evolutionary theory was thought to lead to the following conclusions. First, it was limited to the study of genetic evolution. And cultural change, personal transformation. The word evolution was often used in an informal sense, but these topics were left for other disciplines. Evolution was confined to genetic evolution. Second, everything that evolved by evolution was said to be selfish, a form of self-interest, as in selfish genes. And so anything that might be called true altruism, true compassion, was thought not to evolve at all. And third, evolution was said to have no purpose. Genes just vary at random, and it is only the environment that does the selection. And I think you can see how little this theory has to offer to the study of compassion, personal transformation, and an ethics for the whole world in its form 50 years ago. But thankfully, things have changed over the last 50 years, and I can proud to tell you about a new paradigm that's emerged that's much more favorable to your world view. First, those 3 ingredients, variation, selection, and replication, actually describe cultural change and personal change in addition to...
단데 도마단 롱압주 콜리아 evolution 그 따와저와 따와데네 진장냥 돈데 마도 되시게 매바다 아니 자외 그 괜찮이 참마랑도 고주 장장 전문의 지고 디지털 닝지다 셴벨로도 되시게 매바 차기어레스 데네 교와 태제 아니 단아 evolution 그 개주 숨져와 variation da selection da reproduction 시게 디지털네 아니 미기 personal transformation that
So we can go beyond the informally calling these evolution and actually use the tools that have been developed for genetic evolution to study these fast-paced changes taking place all around us, positive and negative, and also within us, our capacity as open-ended beings for transformational change. Second, altruism, compassion, everything that we associate with goodness actually can evolve as a product of evolution. It's not inevitable, but when certain conditions are met. So altruism, and compassion can evolve. And third, evolution can be a conscious process, need not be blind. So this means that we could guide our evolution, and indeed must, to achieve an ethics for the whole world. And I think you can see that this new view of evolution has so much more to offer the study of compassion, transformation, and all of that. It's like the difference between sailing against the wind or sailing with the wind. So this makes it an exciting time to be blending science, spirituality, and religion, which is what the Mind and Life Institute and other worthy organizations are all about. Now, believe it or not, some of these points could be made less abstract by two experiments that have been done on chickens. And so chickens, as you know, are a domesticated species, and that means that some of their properties have been selected by us, not by nature. So we have consciously evolved chickens, and this is a hint that conscious evolution is something that's possible when we...
And also, I think, beef.
And beef, yes, all of the domestic animals. So this is a hint that actually we can consciously direct evolution by choosing the target of selection. And in these two experiments, involves selecting for egg-laying productivity. We want chickens to lay more eggs. And in both cases, the chickens lived in groups. So in the first experiment, we choose the most productive hen in each cage to breed the next generation of hens. And in the second experiment, we choose the most productive cages, and we take all of the hens within those cages to breed the next generation of hens. Now, you might think that the first experiment would work better because, after all, it's individuals that lay the eggs. But the result of the first experiment, paradoxically, was that egg laying went down, not up. Why? It's because the most productive hen in each cage was the biggest bully, the most aggressive hen, who achieved her productivity by suppressing the egg laying of the other hens. And aggression is heritable in chickens, so that means that after 5 generations, we had bred a strain of sociopaths.
cage 간다 지운 것도 는 공망부 다니 마음이 마도 자들이 랭원에 마담 바체제 소뱅원에 담 다지디고 당부디 담교 나온 단제나 공망 땅 거르데 공망 용어 땅 차고 가서는 코란도 지기적 톱주 다니 톱주고 돈은 강한 태가 어렸어.
So, the second experiment, by choosing the most productive cages, those were the most peaceable hens, and by selecting them, then it turns out that compassion is just as inheritable as aggression. And so after 5 generations, we had produced a strain of compassionate hens who helped each other lay eggs. And in 5 generations, we had a strain of hens that were on the path to enlightenment. And so, this simple experiment introduces a theory called multi-level selection, which is part of the new paradigm. And one of the lessons is that egg laying is not an individual trait, even though you can measure it in an individual. Egg laying is actually a social process. And this is true not only for chickens, but for all of the rest of us. Just because we can measure it in an individual does not mean that it is an individual trait. Whether we are good or bad, whether we're the victims or the victimizers, and the way we are not standalone individuals. We are nodes in a social process. And what would that be but the concept of non-self and the systemic view of Buddhist thought, as I understand it. So I think there's a wonderful convergence there.
단디 그것도 계주 방법이 몇개 돈에 대시 잡도 두고 어래 그 제버체도 요르데네 터두고 대시 대시한라 두두고 돈은 좀 남아도 해요. 말 대산 디다단데 남배숑네 변전 두두다 덴데 계시 해다 아니보시라도.
So another insight is that selection at the smallest scale between individuals within a single group favors destructive selfishness. And this is because natural selection is based on relative fitness. It doesn't matter how well you survive and reproduce in absolute terms, only that you do so better than the other individuals in your vicinity. Who's on top is the way that it goes. And so natural selection operating at the smallest scale actually produces social pathologies. The suffering that we inflict on each other is actually a product of evolution operating at this small scale. So you might say that's the bad news. The good news is that if we go up a little bit and we look at natural selection of groups doing better than other groups, then we find evolution favoring cooperation, altruism, in all of its forms, at least within members of those groups, And so what we have now is we have a theory that can explain the evolution of goodness, and we can explain its limitations, how goodness evolves, but also the other evolutionary forces that are pushing back. So we have a theory that can explain both the existence of goodness and the limitations to its spread. And life consists not only of two tiers, individuals within groups, but it consists of groups within groups within groups, multiple tiers. And that logic is the same at every rung of this hierarchy. So in familiar terms, what's good for me can be bad for my family. What's good for my family can be bad for my clan. What's good for my clan can be bad for my nation. What's good for my nation can be bad for the world. And we can even go down and we can think of cancer as what's good for my cell can be bad for the organism. What would cancer be but natural selection taking place inside our bodies, favoring cells that proliferate compared to the more cooperative cells within our
selection 영향을
bodies.
받는 거래.
So, but what actually
What is the
what
factor?
regulates the selection process itself?
Selection.
The selection process itself is very highly regulated, except mutations will result in cells that escape those regulations, and then they're like outlaws, basically. They're like, so they escape the regulations, and then they proliferate compared to other cells.
Now here I have one question, and in the past also, as I expressed that. Our sun, since this sun, I think about 5 billions of years, isn't it? And then the last 1 billion, the life started. These life just for the vegetation or something.
Very kind of very micro level.
Microbes, yes.
So, its original source is same, the particle, atomic level or something particle. Then gradually, one sort of particle, you see, create also the so-called consciousness.
Or lifelong.
Lifelong. Trees, flowers, even rocks, there's life.
Lifelong.
So then one particle eventually you see create consciousness. So what's the main differences?
What makes those differences?
Now, like rocks, these because of the all these articles, basically same sources, particle. Then world because of creation, it's the same, no life. But eventually, this is some particle create or acting basis of consciousness. One, sort of without consciousness,
without consciousness,
without feeling.
inorganic. Nare.
당아주이나 지 뒤처럼 지기 시베 댄싱에 뒤처럼 직지기 시베 댄미싱에 디 임지도 그렇게 거래.
So if you look in terms of sort of the grand scale of evolution of life, the basic source remains the same, which is an inanimate, particles, and forming into greater aggregations and molecular processes. But one strand leads to inorganic micro-level objects that we see in the world. But another strand, give rise to an organism that is able to support consciousness. So what would scientists explain what makes that kind of trajectory?
It's very much a matter of multi-level selection. And this is so interesting. It's called major evolutionary transition. What life is, we think, at its origin, is groups of cooperating molecular reactions. Inorganic life has molecular chemical reactions, but they're not cooperating in a way that can sustain themselves. And so the first life form were little tiny groups of molecules.
Life is 심어서 리마서.
말에 단에 대인의 것도 라이프 규바디 돈에는
자, 안되지 가서 그래. I think now atomic level. I think movement by nature. And then you see the
aggregation.
more combination or more groups. And then different forms come.
Right. And
자장가 디는 신식이 그 가서 누시기 하시다. 소용해야 돼. 가리사는 용도.
So His Holiness is essentially asking, what would be the scientific explanation for why in some processes consciousness arises and in others not? The ability to experience pain and pleasure and so on. So is there an understanding what...
So there must be third sort of factor.
A factor.
One particle just remain like that, and eventually, also the conscious, because of the thing which no consciousness draws,
objects,
all these things, and one tiny sort of
particle.
same sort of nature of particle, eventually create
the basis for consciousness.
Consciousness or some kind of feeling.
so this is still very controversial. There is no consensus on this. But I think that a primitive life itself can be thought of as a primitive form of consciousness, which then evolves, consciousness evolves. And so as organisms become more developed and elaborate, then they become more goal-oriented, more conscious. And of course, with humans, we have a form of consciousness which is still even further advanced, and that consciousness can expand still further. In a way, that's what needs to happen, is the consciousness is at a global scale.
Then do you think sun have some consciousness or not?
Me, I would say no.
Oh, yes.
The physical world, I would say consciousness begins with life, I would say. So
The sun also have life.
sun gives life. I'm not sure that an astronomer would say that sun
Some kind of its
has
own life.
Yeah.
Begin, then sometimes it become more hotter, because of sun, because of the fire.
Let it explodes. Yeah.
Then gradually, now the sun
Disappears.
I think burnt itself or become cooler. So there is some kind of life change,
Sure. Yeah.
but no consciousness.
I would say I would agree with that. So
So now they gradually, I think because of sun and these different sort of sada,
Celestial bodies slowly came into being. Yeah.
then including our world. Then on this world, originally, I think, some kind of sea, right? Water.
Water.
Then some jellyfish. Then they become more active. So you see, try to live on land.
On land, yeah.
So then gradually, 2 hands, legs, this come. That's the evolution. Survive jatundala chik bezuru cheni Thomas Shobarski right chunane nya dengi til do senle dengi ko evolution to do de to so the consciousness said mazubena kasore kam learn ne de sol ne de soja de kam the leya de ko chik kasore 소소다 소야기 즉 그거를 세례 소리 하지 말বে 대 페이지 consciousness man 띄운거예요.
So Solins was saying that you can see in the long process of evolution, a large part of the variations is really driven by this drive for survival and seeking what is the best conditions for the survival. So they may, in the animals which may originally be in sea, comes out, and then gradually as a need arises, limbs protrude, and then they adapt. So one would say that these were actually driven by, in some sense, a kind of a conscious, desire.
That is largely correct. And for the experts in the audience, it's called the Baldwin effect. And what it means is basically is that, first of all, organisms do things as individuals. They learn, they adapt that way. And then that actually directs the genetic evolutionary process. So learning is a fast evolutionary process, and the slow process of genetic evolution follows where the fast process of learning leads. So that is a way that evolution can be conscious. So I think that your account is, to a large extent, correct. Organisms directing their own evolution.
conscious 고유수 건두시 가 저상다 particle atomic level same particle but one particle eventually produce consciousness, one particle not produce consciousness. What's the factor? There must be third factor. See? The particle.
So because the basis is really, this material basis is the same. So why would one lead to consciousness and why wouldn't the other? So there must be a third factor that would explain that difference.
I would say
the particle selection.
He's wondering whether it's actually just purely a random selection on the part of the particles themselves.
Consciousness challenge me.
So, but Solins was asking, do you actually accept the idea of consciousness?
Now here like this, some feeling.
Of course.
Oh,
of course.
This consciousness.
Yes, well, consciousness.
That feeling. Now here, no feeling.
So organisms.
So that's fact.
Yeah.
Now we must have some sort of explanation how it began.
It arose, yeah.
So a blind process of evolution produces organisms that are not at all blind. They are conscious. And then conscious organisms, that feeds back to give an element of consciousness to the actual evolutionary process. And that's why evolution can have a direction, and that we can refine that direction by managing our own evolutionary process. So this is where we come to.
And many years ago, there's one scientist, you see, he explained the chromosomes. So then 6 billion human beings, the 6 billion human beings each have different chromosomes. The chromosome ki shivar jawke yana mana.
So what is the connection?
Chromosome the kasure. The semi chromosome sigi yana mana.
Because the chromosome is a feature of life, yeah?
For genetic evolution,
for genetic
yes.
level.
Yes.
So
semi pembula chromosomes sige
So you can't talk about attribute chromosomes in inorganic matter.
Well, life is composed of inorganic matter,
Yeah.
but that doesn't define life. Inorganic matter, I mean, chemicals, the material basis of life, it exists in both living forms. It's the same material passing back. and
that's
forth.
life.
So
Something
life is a
different
process.
life. Rocks also life. That's right.
Tana kutu life se tila pyo mare kutu life slap to so ten samtang kore. Kundu living sta life slap to.
And true life yore mare.
So would you say water has life or water is alive?
I would say no, water is not life.
Killing mare now. Kutu so ten ra samtang kutu.
Water does not have the three ingredients of variation, selection, and replication. Life has those three ingredients. Now, if evolution will not occur without those three ingredients.
지금 두시 기습식도.
두시겠지 말해. 단데 소 요마요르지.
맞다가는 selection 세도 두시 좋아요.
But they're necessary for life.
But the selection is not conscious, though, because it's a natural process.
뭐 conscious 다 소원 두시 저저 몽구슬링도.
A great deal of selection is not conscious. We're not asking, is all of evolution a conscious process? We're asking, can evolution be a conscious process? Much evolution is blind.
I think when we also discuss something about the feeling, then firstly we should study the Indian psychology, the variety of sort of the
Mental factors, mental factors, factors of
so
experience.
each the
So each of these factors are defined from their functional perspective.
that's mind selection that the children
Because
that
when
which
we-
rapato siya shushakudo.
So because when we talk about, when we use terms like mind or consciousness, it tends to give an impression of something monolithic. But in fact, you need much finer differentiations. And these are found in the Indian psychology.
저는 어디 under this chamber the chromosomes tanda mi 메른 거를 chromosome 메다 요리스 chromosome that mi bana 가서다 지 버블을 그 chromosome 저도
나를.
자자가 디나리아 지 feeling 디나 저여나면아 상관없어.
His Holiness was wondering because he was told that chromosomes, each of us have, individuals have different chromosomes. And so even many of the physical features of the individual person can be defined, in some explained on the basis of chromosomes. So he was wondering, is there some connection between chromosomes and consciousness?
I don't think that consciousness could be traced to chromosomes per se. And one of the points I want to make is that in addition to our genes, we have our symbols. We have our symbolic systems, our meaning systems. And our meaning systems have as much of an influence on our behavior as our genes. So this is called dual inheritance theory. In our species, we have two streams of inheritance, the genetic and the symbolic, that co-evolve with each other. And of course, I think consciousness resides much more in our meaning systems. Where else would they be? Our religions or our secular meaning systems, all of us have a dense system of symbols inside our head, which is influencing how we behave at least as much as our genes, and which, of course, themselves evolve in great diversity and can be managed so we could actually guide the evolution of our meaning systems, which is what we need to do.
David, the last point, so we can guide our meaning systems, so we
Yes.
can live in a more ethical way.
Well, the last point I want to make is to distinguish when we construct our worlds, we need to construct our inner worlds and we need to construct our outer worlds. And what does it mean to construct our outer worlds? It means that we have to construct our groupings. We have to construct what our norms of behavior, how we reward good behavior, punish bad behavior, how we transmit and store information. And so there's a whole external world that needs to be constructed in addition to the internal world. And I know that in Mind and Life and with so much of what you do has to do with the construction of the inner world, what's inside our minds. And I feel that that needs to be supplemented by a mindful construction of our external world, the groups that we form all the way up from small groups. And a major point to make is that the basic building block of society is not the individual, it's the small group of individuals that are doing things meaningful together. The small group is a kind of a cell in a multicellular social organism. And so I think that the inner life within each of us and then the external world both need to be constructed. And I'm eager to have that conversation as to what we do with our external world in addition to what we do with our internal world.
그래 external will 미식 수고세.
말에 자전이 참고래서 나가서 다 전부리 야같이 속고나 다 초진에 몇 개를 수수도네 셈을 교와다야 다 로자야 다 순한 거대야 지지조 차견다 데가 돈에야고 규조 당고야 다 두즈데야 삼당고야 초니가 송제가 돈을 줘 해지를 샤서.
Oh yes, since human being develop, then yes, this is your question.
That's relevant.
Related.
Yeah. No.
But before human being, even you see some tiny life, then not yet, you see, I think develop human
brain.
like a human brain, thinking, not yet. Some tiny, even I think the mammal, the pig,
like the apes. Yeah. Do you know the size in comparison to human brain, the ape's brain?
Oh, it's much smaller. It's much smaller. Another interesting thing to say is that apes are much less cooperative than humans, much less. So humans are much more peaceable than our closest relatives, and in large part that's because we domesticated ourselves. We selected each other for more peaceable behavior in the same way that we have in chickens. And so that is a fascinating new development in evolution, is to think of the concept of self-domestication.
So you talked about the chicken experiment, and then the aim is to have more eggs laid. So he was wondering whether
one group of hen, you see, peaceful area, one group of hen, a lot of noise. Any differences?
Will you expect a difference in their productivity? If the hens are in a cage in an environment where they're peaceful, no noise, no bright lights.
Surely, yes. Yes, you could alter the environment that way, yes.
But that will make a difference to the laying of the eggs.
Right.
You keep on rules.
So
that suggests that even the animals need peace.
Totally need peace and need to be bred so that they don't inflict suffering on each other. So, and then their environments need to be peaceful environments as well.
Good. Thank you.
Yeah.
So how are we doing on time?
Maybe one more question. And then
Another question. So this is a question I'll first pose to Your Holiness, and then, David, you can chime in. So I understand that we as human species have this capacity for both selflessness and selfishness, right? For cooperation and compassion and altruism, and also for opposition and this ability to take away from others. How do we help others to resist the temptation for selfishness and self-serving behavior
멜다 차겐니가 요레스 멜 차겐니가 요레스 수롱동 고주체 건다 꿀롱지다 야챈야 챈벤체야다 챈냠보 냠루체야다 고프신체 차겐니가 요베인자 다 지구드마 슈충다에 답시 가려나스
And in such a way that the people who are kind and gentle and compassionate are not exploited. They're not taken advantage of by those that are more selfish.
Yes.
Logic, shima, tudun, page, 가져오라. 미주 전부 중에서는 대가고 쳐야지. 미리 계시고 말이, 출루 계시고 말이.
So His Holiness feels that in our infancy, probably we're all the same. So there's this natural quality is much more kind of expressed, and the children will respond to others' kindness spontaneously, regardless of whether they know the language or whether they're identified with that group or whatever. So maybe up to age 4 or 5.
I often telling many years ago in Switzerland, pathology, children's
Village, yeah.
pathology.
Children's village, pathology.
So there I noticed one home, Jewish children. Next, Palestine children. So these people, you see, not much sort of conflict, no differences. They play together. So I always feel the existing education is not, education itself is causing problem. Education, you see, make differences, we and they. That's the source of problem. So in education, therefore, we should emphasize oneness of 7 billion human beings. The different religion, different country is secondary. Basically, we are same human being. We have to live together on this planet.
Yeah.
That's probably a good way.
Do you have anything to add, David, in terms of, say, conscious evolution?
Well, we talk in planetary terms.
사실 그거래. 가. 저 당고문은. 자동야 계절 따고 와요. 그 수수 그랬다 줄 못하.
No.
So,
His Holiness is suggesting the tea to be served,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Tea will be
So
served.
according to time,
Yeah.
they must serve. 나중 계절 따요.
So His Holiness is saying that serving tea should not be contingent upon stopping the conversation. Just to watch the clock.
나중 저거기 갖고미하다 저거도 생인데 코르코르 들어가지 마도 나중 계절 지금 왔다.
Because when it comes to thirst and hunger, it only obeys the biological law. It doesn't care about where the conversation is ending or not.
Should we continue?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So finish with David, and
Yeah,
then
and then
Richie
we'll
can
open
join
it
us.
up.
Yeah.
저 조금만 누가? 조금만 누게.
Okay. So David, you respond. Yeah.
Well, I like to think about small groups in addition to the whole Earth. And when you look
How
at
big are small groups? When you say small groups, what's a small
even the
group?
smallest group of 5 or 6 people trying to do something together, when you look at how that goes, you find that it varies. And sometimes you get wonderful cooperation, sometimes you can't get them working together at all. And we can structure groups. So basically, human groups are like either the first chicken experiment or the second chicken experiment, and how those groups are structured can help them become like the second experiment. You write often of compassion being muscular, that just because we're compassionate doesn't mean that we allow ourselves to be exploited. We stand up for injustice and
One of my Indian friend is once told me the rate suicide in big city much higher. The countryside, the sense of community much
Stronger.
stronger. So like farming,
The farming communities, rural area.
Yeah.
So you see, they have the feeling, if I find some difficulties, I can ask this family, that family.
That's
And
right.
worker in big city, just oneself.
Shall we circle and then?
Yes, so, thank you. So what we're going to do now, for all of you that are here, we are going to transition into expanding the conversation. And we're going to, Richie is going to facilitate a discussion with all of us, and His Holiness will stay and participate in that. So what we're going to do is we're going to move chairs around a little bit, so just bear with us for 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Wait. Let's do something. First, let me go toilet.
So Aaron, you want to put, but once he comes in, you might want to just circle it here. Okay. I think that you can just grab that. Yeah, that's the easiest.
How many people?
Holiness. Before we jump back in, there are two issues that you brought up that I didn't have a microphone before, so I couldn't respond to. So I will take this opportunity to just address two things. One is about brain size. Elephants have larger brains than humans. We need to look at brain size in relation to body size. So that's a very important issue because there are many species that have larger brains than humans, but if you look at the ratio of brain size to body size, that's where the difference lies.
저 속시중은 계속하면 되지.
말다 소구치중에 뛰어내는 레바 치중 시세 삼당고 그래서 진짜네 랑진
오늘 란지 있는 것들이 제일 고.
랑진 뛰어내 랑진 레바 가서 레 체가 요래서 때네 수쿠란 수불 베베 야 레베 체 중주차 찍고 그래서 소구친 보인다.
But the other issue that you raised is about what distinguishes between conscious and non-conscious combinations of material matter. And the conventional mainstream understanding would argue that it's basically complexity. And that when a sufficient level of complexity is reached, then that creates the conditions for consciousness. How it does that is still a mystery, and I don't think we've made any progress substantially, but the understanding is that with the number of neurons which we have and the number of connections which exceeds 1 trillion, we create, it's really the most complex matter in the universe, and that level of complexity is what is critical and distinguishes the matter from which consciousness is said to arise compared to matter from which consciousness does not arise.
그래서
망고 좀배 돈에 용승이 전부 용되고라 니시네 레벨 간다 셰바게 시된 자그를 슬라마도 다야 가르치는 연구를 슬라면 김제 셰요 말을
들 거라.
그것도
네. 그렇죠.
티 예, 자데도 야 최상이사 최상이사도
오.
If I might
Your tea?
add to that. Tea, yes, I do.
오케이.
Yes, thank you. If I might add to that, all important words have multiple meanings. And
Good one.
consciousness, oh, thank you very much.
Too big.
Too big?
Take one.
Thank you.
I'll take a little piece.
Take a minute.
I think too small.
So I think a simpler word than consciousness is intentional and goal-directed. That's one meaning of consciousness, is to be intentional and goal-directed. And in that sense, all organisms are conscious because they go about life, they're highly intelligent in a way. They search for food, they search for mates, they avoid the elements and predators. That's one meaning of consciousness, which I think is simple for everyone to understand. That's not a matter of complexity so much as just being goal-directed. And I think that helps us zone in or focus in on what we really want to do, is we want to be more goal-directed in how we solve our problems. But I think multi-level selection, I think, adds an additional sharpness of focus as to exactly what we must do in order to eliminate this kind of suffering. What we must do is we must suppress the potential for disruptive, self-serving behaviors within groups so that between-group selection becomes the prevailing evolutionary force. So multi-level selection theory is actually quite specific about what we must do in order to avoid some of these disruptive forces.
So, I mean, there are just a couple of things, and then we'll dive into some specific issues that you raised, David. But about the issue of goal direction, bacteria are goal-directed, but they don't feel pain. And so I think that the question His Holiness was really asking is about sentience. And And so what is it that gives rise to the capacity for sentience? And so there's a lot of good evidence that single-celled organisms can be goal-directed, but they don't experience pain.
How do we know they don't experience pain?
I think that there's a lot of evidence using a variety of different sources that the mainstream community interprets that evidence as showing that they don't experience pain. I think that I think there's still a question here. But I want to move to this beautiful idea that you've introduced of conscious evolution and probe a little bit more deeply and also ask His Holiness about this. To say, first of all, if you can say a little bit more about what you envision as conscious evolution, and also in some sense you're using evolution to describe many different mechanisms. There's genetic evolution, but there's also cultural evolution, and those operate on different mechanisms. And so one question is whether conscious evolution actually has effects on the very material substrate of genetic evolution, and whether there is a more unifying theory which would bring them together. And finally, there's the issue of, with conscious evolution, who decides, and how do we think about that? So maybe you can begin to unpack some of those issues.
Wow! In the short time, remaining. Well, I think one of the amazing things about what's been happening in my field of evolution is that we've gone back to basics and defined evolution in terms of these three ingredients. And when we do that, we find that variation, selection, replication processes are everywhere, and each one has a different mechanism. So we know about genetic inheritance. More recently, we've learned about epigenetic inheritance, changes in the expression of genes, not in gene frequency. Then we have forms of social learning found in many species.
Can I just interrupt for 1 second? I think it would be great to just say a little bit more for His Holiness and others about the inheritance, the epigenetic inheritance.
Sure.
Because that's a very new phenomenon in science, and it has profound implications.
So all of our cells have the same genes for the most part, but they're very different from each other. And the reason for that is because some genes are turned on and other genes are turned off. That's what epigenetics is the expression of genes. So epigenetics has long been known to exist within our own bodies and explains why we have so many different cell types. What's new is that epigenetics can be transgenerational. In other words, something happens to you, and that results in the upregulation of some genes and the downregulation of others. And then, so now you behave differently, and what's new is, so will your offspring. Your offspring has inherited not just your genes, but that turned on, turned off pattern. And do you know that can even extend to your grand offspring and great grand offspring?
Fundamental thing is whether beside this body some phenomena which we call consciousness. One clear sort of, I think for us, it's a clear indication is there are people who remember about past life. I met few children. They clearly mentioned about their past life and very detailed, different name of their parent and their families and their location. I actually met. Nobody can deny. It is fact. So now we This body is something new. After sort of father's semen and mother's egg combine, then this body you see develop. And this brain also then develop. But no connection, previous life. One small Tibetan boy born in Lhasa, he insists, my place is not here, in India. Then with parent, come here, Dharamsala. Then that boy say, no, this is not my place. My place is south. So eventually, the parent went South India and then reached one one monastery. Then you see that boy say, oh, now this is my place. And then that boy, and then I think 4 or 5 years old. Oh. And that boy, you see, led parent and reach one house. And then that boy say, now this is my room. And you see, that boy expressed my sort of glass in that box. And then open the box, glass there. And then at least to see another, I met one Indian. I don't know, the parent believe rebirth or not. The girl, both case girl. So one Kanpur, one Ludhiana. So very young. So they remember about past life. And then the girl in Kanpur, now 4 parents. So their previous, that is a girl, passed away at a young age. So previous parents still alive. Eventually, the previous parent so convinced that young girl is their previous sort of daughter sort of, because of life,
rebirth.
So you see now that girl, 4 parents, previous lives 2 parents, this lives 2 parents. So this something happened.
It's a phenomenon, yeah.
Oh. So now, according to the Indian tradition, the previous life, the India, the concept of Atma, something self, something separate from this body. So that self, no beginning, no end, always go that way. So that's the sort of basis of rebirth. The Buddhists, you see, Buddhists and also I think some different sort of tradition, we believe consciousness, the sensorial level consciousness, obviously depend on these organs. So new body, new consciousness.
So because so every experience of even a sensory experience requires an external objective condition and also a sensory organ, which is the physical basis. And then in the Buddhist epistemology, there's also a third factor, which is an immediately preceding conscious experience. So these 3 are the main conditions that give rise to a moment of perception.
Like a particle,
so like the matter in the material world, conscious experience are also understood to arise from their similar type continuum.
So beginning of this whole sort of solar system, there must be a particle. When empty space, the subtle particle always there. So we describe that the particle is space particle. The nangetu.
Space particles.
Space particle. Always there. Then some occasion, those who see space particle because of combine, then different shape, then different
Cosmos,
planet,
no.
you see, develop. So there is, I want to tell you, we have sufficient explanation these things.
This is when we need to practice humility and just say, we don't know.
We don't know. Right.
So I think the memory about past life is eyewitness. Then according to my parent, I also express past life.
Recollection, no.
Ka.
Recollection of past
Oh.
life, yeah.
And that, because I go to shazi kishi,
Going to Tensrela,
ninja,
no.
to the tree. Now recently I met, you see, that
The young boy.
that boy who very clearly expressed past life.
Memory.
Now I ask, nowadays, can you remember? And he says no. So then I felt very good. So it is my kasada.
Own experience.
Ah.
My own experience with
No.
then the
There are people who previously very young, clearly memory, then
getting older, yeah. Grow up.
getting older, then forget. So that's my companion. So at one young age, about 3 years old, I also have some sort of
Recollection.
indication, remember about past life. One, I think quite strange, the search party group, you see, they come my house, very small village. That very morning, I very much excited. My mother, my parent do not know. Then you see, visitors come. Then immediately I run towards them and recognize these people. I mention their name. So at the very, very young age, seems to some memory. Now, even what happened yesterday, sometimes difficult to remember. So now, it is fact. People who remember past life. So there must be some explanation or concept. So that we say this subtle level of consciousness. No beginning, no end. Always go that. So now he carries some project about Tukdam. Tukdam means person actually died. Dead. The heart beating stop. Then blood circulation stop. Then brain dead. But still body remain very fresh. So there must be one factor which keep that body still fresh. So he carry, you see these, in India, last now over 60 years, I think one longest person, longest sort of day
Time.
remain, Shabu. Paramuchi, Dundra Gazere. Paramuchi. Nixie Mari. Basalia.
Tingmendo.
Ka.
Rinshot Tisurum.
Chisurmuchi, Shabu Jauja. Paramuchi Shabu Nishatanchi. Peshu Yon, Basalia. To the big Tawai Koro Yore. Ready is Mushi Gusubet, Servache. Shabu Nisuxi in a shore.
So there was this.
In a disho, and the Chisurmuchi, Shabu Jauja, Yuzumchi, Shabu Josum.
So there was in Baksa quite an early days. It
Just louder.
was actually it was during the peak of summer. It was very hot period, but the monk remained in that state for 20-something days. And the next longest was the previous Kanten Tirumbache. He remained in that state for 18 days. And then Kyabjit Lingrimbache, His Holiness's tutor, remained in that state for about 13 days.
Just a few days ago, one monk from Namgyal Monastery. Oh, 4 or 5 days.
5 days. Yeah.
So after death, body remain very fresh and remain like this. So these are, actually we notice.
Observed facts.
So there must be some reason, explanation. So his the project, Tudum project, very useful, very useful. Okay. So now all this, you see, the concept, consciousness and body, and consciousness also you see the
Different
many
levels.
different level, some very subtle. There's no beginning, no end. So that's the basis of rebirth and memory about past life, like that. And then with that, dream body, person sleep and dreaming, at the dreaming. So some, at the time of dreaming, some practice. Through practice, that dream body can separate from this body. Mm-hmm. One monk official, he served in Chamdo area, I think in late 40s, and yes, late 40s. Now, he told me, his mother, I say, one occasion, mother asked them, don't disturb my body, actually sleep. So she slept about 1 week. So then after sleep,
Waking up.
oh, and she mentioned during sleep, her sort of dream body visited different place, then mentioned this place, such things there. So later, exactly, you see, the Rathayachi.
So accurate descriptions of the places that he visited.
So there are such sort of phenomena. You see, we need some more research work. These are phenomena, it's fact. So we must have some explanation. Just so
it's very difficult to explain these phenomena purely from a material kind of perspective.
Yes, indeed, I would say so.
Very difficult. Yes. Yes, to quote Wolf Singer, who said at a meeting, a Mind and Life meeting we had a number of years ago, he said, if this kind of phenomena is really true, then we are in big trouble. Referring to our conventional scientific worldview.
Actually, no problem, no trouble. Nobody can say, so it
should not be a huge problem because nobody can make the claim that we know everything about the world right now.
Sure.
And we
So
don't need
that's
to
why
know more.
science research.
Yes.
You see, there are many things we not yet know.
Yes.
So through investigation.
Yes.
So
Yes.
no worry.
So, David, maybe you can take this opportunity to just say a little bit more about conscious evolution, if you'd like to, before we open it up, because one of the new elements in our Mind and Life conversation is to engage some of the audience, which we haven't done before in a systematic way. But let's have you, David, say a little bit more, if you'd like.
Well, there's this term methodological naturalism, which is basically what we do know already, not the edges of science and not what's beyond the edges of science, but what's squarely in the middle of what we already know as what Darwin called the forces acting around us. And for me, it's very interesting to ask the question, how much progress can we make right smack in the middle of methodological naturalism. And there, when we talk about conscious evolution, I think that there's a form which in many ways might be considered mundane, at least compared to what we've been hearing. But on the other hand, if we can make progress, in this mundane way, then please let's do that. And so that kind of conscious evolution is very easy to describe. It is, we need to basically imagine our future, and then we need to step into that future. We need to construct our own future. Now, everyone wants to do that, and when we talk about positive change, that's exactly what we're trying to do. And so the real question there is, does a more formal knowledge of thinking about this as evolution, does that add value to what we're already aspiring to do? And so there we can make some statements. For example, it needs to be an ethics for the whole world. We really have to have, when we plan our actions, we have to have its impact on the whole world in mind. If we merely make smaller units, smaller groups, functional, working, that won't be good enough because that will create dysfunctions up the scale. Another thing we can say is the importance of the small group. The small group is a missing link of human society. Today we have individuals and large-scale society. What we need is individuals in small groups in large-scale society, and those groups have to have a certain kind of a structure. If it's an anything goes kind of groups, then you're going to get like the first chicken experiment. If it's an appropriately structured group, then you're going to get like the second experiment.
주도 주어 당당데 단에 다대절 제베나 그런 저 삼당당데 미그르바다 아니 지소서 저걸 초고 침부지가 삼당 거로 와서 다대 conscious evolution 도 삼당베나 미그르게 주어 당아 좀더 마세베야 초고 충수데 네 체로제
I think, if may I say so, the Western culture, I mean, each country, their culture, very much related with their belief. So, India, since ancient time, you see the practice of investigation there. So, over 3,000 years, there's a tradition, investigation, already there. Now, in the West, Judeo-Christian tradition, this very life created by God. So, simply, you see, not thinking previous life on these complicated sort of subject. Simply, how God creates we. So that was very good. I always was telling, if you truly believe creation of God,
creation by God,
then we all believe same concept, God, infinite love. So, whole human being, whole world created by God, so all 7 billion human beings are children of same Father, infinite love. So if you seriously believe that, then no way to kill each other. We all children of one Father. That Father, infinite love. So all major religious tradition, I think wonderful. If we seriously follow. Now, unfortunately, look, Shia and Sunni, both accept Allah and the Quran and 5 times prayer. Same, but killing each other. How bad? And then Burma, Buddhist, Muslim, problem. So these, I feel, education. Now these, now the reality. Now we have the responsibility and also possibility to reduce these things. Now, best thing is scientific sort of explanation. So ultimately, more compassionate mind is very much sort of useful for our healthy body, healthy mind, and a happy family, happy community. So, on the basis of scientific finding, there's more easily to explain other people. If God said that, then some people say, where is God? Difficult. Then we Buddhists, more easier, Buddha stated. But then, among the Buddha's own follower, like a Burmese Buddhist. So now, best thing is, you see, we have to make effort to promote one sense of oneness of 7 billion human beings. We are same human community. We have to think we are part of the 7 billion human being, human community. So each of us have the responsibility to create peaceful, happy, compassionate humanity on the basis of science, not religion. Okay.
Wonderful. Maybe we can now open it up to questions. We'd like to keep them brief to give Amy, please.
Thank you very much for that beautiful expose.
That's the way.
Is it on?
Yes, it's on. It's
You
on.
need to keep it close.
I just have to.
Yeah.
I have to keep it closer. So you were talking to us about dual inheritance theory, and you said that you thought that symbolic systems or meaning systems had more effect on the genome than the genetic evolutionary systems, or a quicker one. So that would be a case where the immaterial affects the material. Words, symbolic systems, meaning systems would affect the actual matter of life. Can you explain that?
Another easy one there.
Than the
one point-
evolution process not only than the gene to ne go to chita ya su sam tang ba ta ru shung dan de to ne super rang go to give the she
This allows me to say a little bit more about epigenetics. And because the turning on and off of genes is extremely responsive to day-to-day environmental things. And so that means that, for example, and I believe that you probably know research on this, a course of meditation will upregulate and downregulate a very substantial portion of your genes. So depending on the way we use our minds, that very much influences what we do, and that always is mediated by physical substrates, basically physical mechanism. Anything that happens has a physical cause, but the physical cause is actually not explaining what is happening, because that is based on these forces of selection. If you know a little bit about evolution, you know that there's two kinds of causation: what's called proximate causation, which is the physical causes, and then ultimate causation, which is basically reflects this shaping influence of evolution. That's an inadequate response, because there's so much more to say about that, but that might be the best we can do in a short space.
So there would be no immaterial causes.
Well, I think ultimate causation is immaterial cause. It basically allows us to explain properties without any knowledge of the material makeup of the organism. So I think ultimate causation.
Any other? Lizette?
Thank you, Richie, and thanks so much, David and Your Holiness, for this wonderful discussion. The question I have is, you've talked about selfishness being a trait in individual genetic evolution that's successful. But in cultural evolution, it seems that people who are likable, people who are generous, are more successful. There is some work by Adam Grant that indicated that that's the case. Could you please comment on that?
Well, the reason that there's
Rangtong kochu di mek rangtong kochu bioro rangtong kochu susu rangtong janja chinyek selfishness di and mek gerbachiki kechu ko ton du yor skesheso ni ajik sanjo go shembeng lo tiketi ya shendan trewe ton yung yor nam det ko trewa.
So whenever we see a mix of behaviors in a population, it's likely that that mix is being maintained by these forces of selection. So if we actually see givers, matchers, and takers, to take Adam Grant's 3 types, basically, it's because that in various contexts, each one of those is adaptive. In that great book, he talks about the givers basically doing the best and the worst. And this really gets us back to the basic dynamic of altruism and selfishness. If you're a giver, and if you manage to surround yourself with other givers, the results are spectacular for all of you. But if you get surrounded by takers, then it doesn't work well for you, and it works well for the takers. If you're a taker and you're surrounded by givers, well, isn't that fun? If you're a taker and you're surrounded by other takers, not so fun. And so here are these opposing forces. Sometimes
I would like to ask His Holiness something related to this, to amplify on this question. And that is, Your Holiness, you've spoken a lot and written a lot about the importance of motivation and altruistic intent. And if in this language of the giver, who is the more altruistic person, if the giver is altruistic with the right motivation, with a truly compassionate motivation, we know from scientific evidence that it will benefit health, it will actually have biological consequences, it actually, there's evidence to suggest that it can reduce stress hormones and have a whole range of beneficial biological effects. And so might it be the case that simply being a giver in any context, whether you're surrounded by takers or other givers, there's an intrinsic benefit to the genuine motivation to express compassion in this way?
That's right. I think we human beings consider altruism is something nice. So in the past century, the socialism means respect others. I think Karl Marx, when in Europe industrialization start, the worker suffer very much.
Exploitation.
Exploitation. So he stand right of the working class people. And also, you see, he concern equal distribution. So these, he not necessarily religious person, maybe some faith, Jesus Christ. But you see, helping other people. So I think human nature, we are, as some scientists say, we are social animal. So individual survival entirely depend on the community. So taking care about community is ultimately taking care of yourself. Social animal don't care other community.
Other members,
Ka.
other members,
Ka.
other members in the community.
Oh. Then actually, the very basis of your survival, your happiness, that day in Jimitambro.
So it's like you are ignoring it,
Oh.
you're neglecting it.
As social animal, individuals' survival depend on rest of the community. So community is the basis of your happy life and successful life. So self-centered, selfish, me, is unrealistic. And the reality also, think just one self. And then I think roughly speaking, all phenomena then appears something negative. Practice altruism, then whole phenomena appears something positive. So mental attitude really makes differences.
Yes.
I want to reinforce that and also to amend it a little bit. And I think that this is especially true, the need to be inside a cooperative community is especially true at the small scale, which is like a tribal scale of a small group. The natural human social environment is to be in the bosom of a nurturing, cooperative group. And it's there where we are physiologically and mentally the best. I think that actually there's a strong case to be made. But here's the exception. Here's the exception. All groups, including those groups, are vulnerable to the wolves of selfishness. If everyone is being so nice to each other and they might be getting the physiological effects, it is still the case that an individual who is not that way is going to come into that group and it'll be easy pickings. And those individuals will exist. And so unless altruism can protect itself from the wolves of selfishness, then the wolves of selfishness will come. And of course, we see them all around us at all scales. So we have to do something about the selfishness problem. And counseling people to be altruistic and telling them that they will, then I think that's not enough. There has to be tougher mechanisms in order to keep the wolves of selfishness at bay.
And I wonder, for Your Holiness, if you
그거서
Kadri Jagante, make a good on a low janje, Kuno, Champagne, Kuno, Tenchi Chebaton, Chito Nalolia, Champagne, Chinia, the Nichi Mampion, the Tenti Temperes, the Deton and Gergotolia, Tredan, the same keeper, the Sama Kibuan Tempertane, Chizo to Nalolia, Catune, Chilo and Mia, Random Koju Chinichi, to Yonja, never keg, Kokap Tende Catune or was, these are the Random Koju Chinelia, Tangzi chair, the Colican the chair, Tapum Gemana, Kangin the Reshas, Tatiko, Sunamo de Champagne, the Niji the Lope and Yambola, and a gay yentel talked up chair, the Ted on Lancing Tapum Chotus.
Oh, that's okay. Naturally, warm-heartedness, not blind, combined with intelligence. So judge. In fact, in the Buddhist tradition, one of the precepts of a bodhisattva is advanced practitioners who actually explicitly avow to take altruism as their fundamental, kind of a guiding principle. One of the precepts is that when appropriate, if you don't stand firm and counter injustice, it's actually you are violating one of the precepts.
Yes. So
there's a fierce compassion there.
I think that's so important for that to be part of the conversation.
So, for example, like when we talk at the behavioral level, what seems harsh versus what seems gentle is really, we're speaking purely at the appearance level. Whether to characterize a behavior altruistic or not has to be based upon what the underlying motivation is and what the objective is.
Yes.
Usually I tell it to people, all major religious tradition is, from Buddhist viewpoint, all are creation of human being. So all religion, you see, carry teaching of best quality of human being. That's love. So all major religious tradition, you see, teach us loving kindness. And for that, utilize different philosophy according to existing circumstances or cultural heritage. So that's okay. But all different philosophical views, same goal, promote human love, compassion. Because religion, as I mentioned this morning, we are quite sinful. No believe God. But you see, since there is no sort of creator, so all these human beings' creation, then naturally, even animal appreciate our smile, our sincere sort of affection. Particularly dogs. If you give some food without showing a nice face, the dog eat.
Go away.
If you show smile and because of pet
the dog.
then they very much appreciate. I think even dogs. To hear one my sort of question is the mosquito. Occasionally I give some blood when I know no malaria.
In the area.
Malaria.
No malaria in the area.
So then give some blood. So mosquito enjoy my blood. And their whole body becomes red. And then at the end, few drops from their body, then fly. No sign of appreciation. So I'm wondering, the brain size.
Very small.
Which size?
What size? Yeah.
Then develop the sense of appreciation.
Capacity
Dogs,
for appreciation.
yes, appreciation. And many other birds also, like that. So these is connected with because of the brain.
Brain size now.
Maybe we have time for one quick last question.
I have this gentleman here, and I have Mona that have both been waiting for questions. We didn't see, so we'll do
Okay, let's do, yeah.
Karsa.
please.
Karsa.
Okay, then the 13 you kept it.
Yes.
No, over there.
Okay.
Thank you. I have a question.
Louder.
Hello. I have a question to His Holiness. So glad to hear that you talked about how education is creating differences, and it's something I'm also arguing in my thesis as to how education is creating, actually reproducing social inequalities. So what, according to you, the kind of reimagination that education system requires in the contemporary time where there's so much urbanization, so much influence of technology, social media, what, according to you, is the reimagination we need in education today?
When I look today's world, a lot of problems which essentially our own creation. So that related with education, I feel. The so-called modern education come from West. In West, you see, moral ethics side is just to believe God. No tradition of training our mind through practice of shamatha, single-pointed mind, one-pointed mind, and analytical meditation. That is only in this country, India, including Jainism and Buddhism, no God, no creator. So everything, something like self-creation. Therefore, training our mind is very important. Just a prayer, not sufficient. So therefore, in this country, over 3,000 years, concept of shamatha, concept of vipassana already developed. And then with that, the concept of ahimsa, non-violence, and karuna, compassion. So now, the existing modern, so-called modern education come from the country where no such practice, no such tradition, only pray to God. So therefore, now the education field, we must include education about our emotion, mind. These days I expressing from kindergarten level, besides sort of education about hygiene of physical, we must include hygiene of emotion from kindergarten level till university level. So training more knowledge about mind, about emotion. Then, not necessarily with belief, no.
Religious belief.
Religious belief. The India's tradition, secular. Religious belief is personal matter. These things are well-being of humanity. So this we should consider academic subject, not religious subject. So religion is personal matter. These things are related with humanity. Now, India, you have very good sort of potential to educate people about mind, about emotion, and how to tackle our destructive emotion. So here, India, modern India, the education introduced by Britisher. The modern education oriented about material value, not talking about this inner value. So now time come, this country should revive the ancient Indian knowledge, how to tackle our emotion on the basis of ahimsa, non-violence, and compassion. India, only this country have the opportunity to combine modern education that sort of brings material development, including science, technology, and then ancient Indian knowledge about mind, combine these two things. So that's my latest, my commitment. I'm trying to revival of this ancient Indian knowledge in education field. It is not sufficient just to carry some, worship or
The prayers.
ritual.
Yeah.
No. Through education. Like that. So, you Indian, you come from which part of India? Delhi.
Delhi.
Oh. So some time back, I think Delhi government, you see, they sort of try to create education for happiness. That's good. Education, not for money, not only for money. The money, why money become important? That brings happiness. So ultimate sort of goal is happiness. If you become slave of money, no use. Many American. Only money, dollar like that. So India, very important.
Well, I think
So we already, start some work with government college here in education should include about education, about mind, about emotion, how to tackle. So now more and more Indian really showing interest. So that's hopeful sign.
Mm-hmm.
Firstly, India, this ancient knowledge is India's knowledge. not something bring from outside. But then once this country, through education about material value and technology, science, and education about how to bring inner peace, then India can show rest of the world. In 20th century, Mahatma Gandhi ji, you see, show world non-violence practice. So now, 21st century, time come, we must show the world training of our emotion, our mind. Isn't it? Like that. So, many Indian truly also showing interest. So my commitment is a revival of this ancient Indian knowledge in India. So next, it seems to see, next 10, 15 years, I think more and more Indian now really showing interest in that. So work that. Then India can show rest of the world. At least it's in neighbor Afghanistan and the Arab world, where too much emotion, too much killing. Very sad, very sad. And the worst thing is, even religious faith used for chadang,
sort of promotion of divisions and hatred.
very sad. Okay.
Thank you so much, Your Holiness. We appreciate your time so much.
Thank you. Now, time come for stomach. Senire yomare.
Yomare. Nani.
Then konazo kachi deore.
La. Ngazu tari cheche.
Ka.
Ngazu tari cheche da. Yankusan nobly got the word that.
Mo sen
Program
digdo.
say.
The sen tuzu chola so shi.
Program say. No. No.
Yang nga di che dongare. Senying jaga na ni chen de yomare. Chesa di mu tun chu ya ga
No.
Sen konazo
Peche sab.
now through the so manga yunyu chainda.
So His
Senyi para
Holiness has
shaga, senyi mutun soga.
So His Holiness has a question. Instead of doing it on Friday, we could do it tomorrow. So would you rather have a day off tomorrow and then come back on Friday, or would you rather continue the conversation tomorrow instead of Friday? So
I think Friday would be better because we're live streaming it and people are watching it.
Okay. Tomorrow I'm going to have some audience. Okay. Then see you again after tomorrow.